Viewers, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the author team of Hema Hari and DK Hari. Hema, DK ji, namaskar, welcome to P Guru's channel. So viewers, today, as you can see from the backdrop that I'm using, we're going to talk about this place called Gosthana and how that name came about. In fact, today's topic is how names were derived for different places over the period of thousands of years, and what was the principles used. And we are going to use some excellent examples of modern day names and old day names. And I'm going to try and have a quiz session at the end, wherein I might ask this all-knowing couple the current name and ask them to remember the original name. So let's see how this thing goes. We're going to have a lot of fun. I am springing this on you, Hema and DK. I hope you will. I know you are fully up to it. So let's see how it goes. And welcome to P Guru's channel once again.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you. So Aksai Chin. Aksai Chin is what today's name is given for what used to be called Gosthana. And as to how this came about and when India lost it, to get a little bit of perspective on this, we will start with this and then we will go on to other names. So it's over to you, Hema and DK.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to always chat up with you and meet all the friends in the P Guru's channel. See, Aksai Chin, as you said, is a name that's been there only post-independence and probably from 1960s when China occupied that region. But if you look at it before that, the traditional name of this Eastern Ladakh region is actually, as you correctly put in the screen, this Gosthana. What does this Gosthana actually mean? Sthana is a place, right, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, or everything is a Hindustan. All this Sthana obviously means a place. The very word, if you look at the place Sthana, comes from stand. It gives the English word also stand, station, stationary. All this comes from the word stan. Sthana, it's a very Sanskrit Indian word, which is also gone into other languages, Latin and Greek, and they're on to English, other languages. So Sthana is about a place. Go, obviously cow, talking about here. So it means what? This place, Gosthana, which is now called Aksai Chin, was a grassy land for cows to go graze in the summer months. Obviously, you can't go there in the winter months because it's too cold. There's a particular variety of cow that's called Ladakhi cow. It doesn't look so much in the family of Bos indicus, but more looks in the family of Bos taurus. Okay, there are different families of cows, like Bos indicus, that's Indian cow. It's got a nice hump. It's there in the seals of Harappa, Mohenjo-daro seals. You see the Bos indicus cow. It's also the NDDB, that's the Amul. In their logo itself, you have the logo of that. And the Indus Bank also has got that logo of that particular hump of that cow. It's a very famous hump. I'm sure it has come across many paintings. Like that, you got a Bos taurus. Belongs to the Taurian Mountains that is there in Western Persia, Anatolia, Turkey. So this looks to me from that sort of family of cows. So this is a proper hill terrain Ladakhi cow. These were sort of grazing those areas. So these were grasslands, grazing lands for those cows. When a month or couple of months ago, the famous Ladakhi scientist, Sonam Wangchuk, he came up with a video of saying that we should boycott or remove all the Chinese apps, first the software and the hardware. One point he mentioned was what? The Ladakhis had lost their grazing grounds there when the Chinese took over the land of Aksai Chin. So here you have the name of a place called Gosthana, which means where the cows go to graze. Then you have a Ladakhi cow for it, specific Ladakhi cow with it. And here Sonam Wangchuk is talking about something bigger about China perspective, but he says how they have taken over their grazing lands. So all these three bring together one point. that this area was essentially very Ladakhi, and they were used for a particular purpose by the local herdsmen, the people who were having the herd. Now, so this is now established. Now let's go to one more point now. In 1960,
But before he goes there, actually, there's one point I would like to tell. This kind of a ghost than, I mean, a grazing area, is common across India in all villages. And we all in the plains, we all are very familiar with the word gaucher. So ideally, the whole the land itself, the civilization was characterized by the fact that they had earmarked certain lands on the periphery of their villages as gauchers, and they were the catchment area. Fundamentally, they played a very, very crucial role in the overall ecological balance for waters throughout the land. So the catchment area and the land around it used to be called a gaucher, which was a common community land where the cows would graze, there would be fruit orchards, and the children could go and play. So nobody could own any piece of that land. It belonged to the community as a whole. And in South, it is called Samudaya Nilam, or in modern times, it's come to be called Porambok lands. It's after one of the British officers called Pembroke, and it evolved to become Porambok. And very sadly, Porambok today has a very derogatory meaning as a very unused piece of land, a wasteland, which is therefore fit enough to be occupied, usurped for housing. But unfortunately, if you really see, that was the most precious land, because it is the place which was the catchment and which was the place fit for cows to go and graze. So that is how things have actually morphed, right, from being Ghosthana to being a piece of a wasteland. And this aspect, actually, there is a better anecdote also, which shows that impression, how it's treated as a wasteland.
In 1960s, when China occupied this land and made it from Ghosthana to Aksai Chin, which is what we are now used to calling, and we've almost forgotten this original name, Ghosthana. And when Nehru was asked this question in Parliament, he said, "Not a blade of grass grows there." So it's okay for Chinese to take sort of, that's what he implied, but he didn't say that. But he said, "Not a blade of grass grows there." To this, a member of Parliament by name Mahavir Tyagi, who was part of the Congress party, and he was from the United Provinces, which is today's Uttar Pradesh area.
Dehradun. He was fundamentally from
Dehradun area. So he immediately, his repartee was, "Nothing grows on my head too. To whom do I give it?" He asked that question.
So fundamentally, like, if it's a wasteland, you can give it. And was it a wasteland at all?
So forget this.
Is any land a wasteland, for that matter?
So here is a question between Nehru, the then Prime Minister, and Mahavir Tyagi, a true nationalist. Okay, that's one side of the picture. So that's okay. But the point is, when Nehru had said that not a blade of grass grows in it, I think he had not understood and not represented correctly to the Parliament, which he should have. Because when he said not a blade of grass grows there, it's an incorrect statement, factually incorrect statement he has made in the Parliament. Because if it is Ghosthana, which it is, and if the Ladakhi cows, which there are, and when a person like Sonam Wangchuk, who comes from that particular tradition, parampara, very clearly says that the Ladakhis have lost their grazing grounds to the Chinese, very clearly shows that blade of grass grows there. It's a grassland. Obviously, that area is a grassland. Obviously, right? So Nehru had misled the Parliament as Prime Minister of India to say not a blade of grass grows there. So that is one he was not aware of, even though he touts to be a Kashmiri, and this was part of the erstwhile Kashmir kingdom. He was not aware of the landscape and the features of the kingdom of Kashmir or the state of Kashmir. That's a very unfortunate thing. Now, similarly, let's come on to see in the very name of Ghosthana and all these details, you see so much coming out.
But today we know of this as Galwan Valley. I mean, one part of it at least as Galwan Valley.
Why is it called Galwan Valley? So again, the Galwan Valley is a very Indian name, very Ladakhi name. In the late 1890s, there was a British expedition of a few people going to chart these areas. They were cartographers. They were willing to go to demarcate the boundary lines as well as to know what valleys, where, what depth. They were doing all this because at that time there was a big trigonometrical survey of India happening all over the land. One of the largest trigonometrical surveys happening, and so they were trying to chart out each areas. These cartographers. So they had to take locals and go everywhere. In this particular case, you had a person named Ghulam Rasool Galwan. He was a Ladakhi person. He went around and showed these people these places. And when he showed the British cartographer these places, usually most of the places the British named it after themselves. We'll come to that later. But in this one rare case, they named it after the person who came and guided them and showed them the way. That is this Ghulam Rasool Galwan. So they named it the Galwan Valley and the Galwan River, this particular thing. So it again shows how this whole area was with the Ladakhis, the natives who were walking around that area, knew the area very well like the back of their hand.
And this river actually is a tributary for the Indus.
Yeah, this Galwan, from the Galwan Valley, the waters, it goes and joins the Sindhu River. You all know that. So it is very much part of that particular landscape. That is why when Prime Minister Modi went this time, he went and did puja for the Sindhu River, because it's all part of that ecoscape.
Riverscape,
That total
landscape, valleyscape.
That's one.
Indiascape.
Yes, very clearly. So somebody else coming and claiming there is all a much later entrant trying to usurp.
A tributary of the river Sindhu cannot belong to China.
Okay, so it's all very much in this area. Let's get into the next point. Galwan, that is Ghulam Rasool Galwan, was the first person to go there. Before him, many other explorers have gone there from India, from the different kings of Kashmir. They've all gone there, and that's why all that area belongs to them politically as a kingdom. They've all gone all the way. That was route for them to go up to Lhasa, Tibet, the other kingdom, and sort of have friendship, ambassadorship between these kingdoms. So that was very much part of the landscape. Well-known traveled area. It was not some unknown. It was not, as you say in English, no. It was not the God-forsaken area in some bunduk, some corner. No, there's no. I differ with the word God-forsaken, because every piece of earth is part of God-given. There's nothing God-forsaken in any piece of this earth. Everything is God-given. So we should appreciate that. I don't agree with that word God-forsaken, that phrase at all. Okay, everything is God-given. Now let's come. We have now established.
There's yet another. So here, when you have seen a case where the British explorers named a place after an Indian native who helped them, the direct contrast is their exploration of the region of the place, the peak, which is today called Mount Everest. That's another beautiful story. So as part of the same survey and the trigonometrical survey, and they had gone and they had measured the heights of Mount Everest, and that exercise was going on. It was again Indian native, naturally, who helped them up there. A person, Nain Singh, right?
Nain Singh was there. Actually, he was the one who helped them, and there was a person named Andrew Waugh. Of course, the name Waugh is now a little more familiar to people who know cricket. There were Steve Waugh and Mark Waugh who played for Australia, so the name Waugh is little well known now. But there was a person named Andrew Waugh, who was the person who measured it with a theodolite of those days to give you the height of Mount Everest, and he said so. And when he gave the name, he showed them, and then they measured it and said, this is the tallest peak in the world. I wanted to name it after somebody. He had a whole range of names to give, right from Victoria Peak to whatever, because their Queen, King George, whichever peak they wanted to name it. But this man decided to name it after his immediate boss, because he wanted to please him. So his immediate boss was George Everest. So he thought he'll name it after Everest, so that he'll get his brownie points to go up the ladder in his career. Basically, that's all. But that's how this person, Andrew Waugh, named it Mount Everest. When he was trying to name it Mount Everest, at the same time, the Indian explorers with them, they said this peak already has a name, both in the Sanskrit language as well as in the Tibetan language. It's got two names. They already said one is called Sagarmate. That's in the Sanskrit language. What does the word Sagarmate mean? Sagar means sea. Hindu Mahasagar, all that you see is sea. Sagar is sky. Mate is forehead. Mate is forehead. So this is the forehead to the sky.
The peak whose forehead is in the sky.
In the sky.
Already.
So already
The forehead touches the sky. So it's the tallest with its forehead in the sky. Where the sky forms its forehead.
Look at how beautifully they named it. So aptly named. It was called Sagarmati. And so that was a name. Even now used by all the Nepalis there, they still call it Sagarmati in all the local language. They don't call it Mount Everest yet. It's only for the expeditions when the Westerners come.
The touristy name is Mount Everest.
But the actual local name is still Sagarmati in all the texts. Next, in the Tibetan language, it is still known as Chomolungmo. That is why the Darjeeling toy train that goes in Darjeeling, that old British train, British time, that train that goes up the narrow gauge, that is still named Chomolungmo. Because from there you're supposed to see motor, so that's why they got the name there. So it's still, so the toy train image is there, Chomolungmo, and it's very much there. Like that, see how in one place they usurp the name Sagarmate or Chomolungmo to give it the name Mount Everest, which we should again now, we should take back and give the original name, what it actually geographically means.
So
Yes, sir.
one question that comes to my mind is, when did the Goes disappear from this land?
Obviously, once they usurped and prevented anybody else coming there, right?
Which one?
Goes disappeared from the Ghostana.
Ghostana, yeah, because once that is what Sonam Wangchuk in his video is bemoaning. Clearly bemoaning, he says they have taken away our grazing lands.
So until that time, the cows would graze.
So that is very clear. He says it very clear. They have taken away our grazing lands. This is a statement he has made because he has spoken about something else, about boycotting the Chinese apps. But
There is this telling line in his statement.
which many people would sort of just gloss over. So we are taking that line, which normally is glossed over, but he is building up to a larger story. So that's one of the building blocks of his storyboard. So he says that there, and we see the actual name, because he doesn't use the word Ghostana in his video. These are old maps. So it's a statement by him about loss of grazing grounds, to a name in the old map, to Nehru saying that in the parliament, that misleading the parliament or misrepresenting the fact
Because even
that not a blade of grass grows there. Now, having spoken about grass, I'll take another example now. Let's go to the state of Uttarakhand. Dev Bhumi. You've got Kedarnath there. It's a very famous Shiva temple. Okay. Now, the words about Kedar itself mean? It means a meadow in a trough.
it's a flat land of meadows or a flat land of water. It's like a basin, flat basin. Not just a trough like that, but just a flat basin.
in the midst of the hills. That's what Kedar means. So the Nath who lives in Kedar is Kedarnath. So that's why temple. See, so the temple was named after a geographical phenomena there.
Feature.
Not phenomenon, feature of that area that was named after so beautifully. So aptly named. You take it Sagarmati, the way it's named, Ghostana, Kedarnath. Similarly, if you look at Badrinath, because the Badri, the berry, the Badri is actually a berry, a variety of local native berry which grows. So it is called Badrinath. It doesn't grow of Badri. Like each name.
Very interestingly, Tibet itself is one such name. It's a very beautiful story about Tibet, something that we can all relate to very nicely. See, in Indian languages, the word for heaven is Trivishtam. Okay, you will find it in one of the words. Swarga is all there. One of the words which is very commonly used is also Trivishtam. And Trivishtam means thrice folded. Trivishtam means 3 levels. Okay, 3 folds. And this Tibet, if you see, is actually on top of the Himalayas, and the Himalayan mountain range itself is 3-folded. You have the lower Himalayas, Shivalik range,
where life is a Shivalik because the Shiv life, Jivan.
And then you have the middle range, which is called the Mahabharat, because that kind of demarcates the boundary.
Great range of Bharat.
So Bharat, Mahabharat. And then only you have the higher upper range, which is called the Himalaya, abode of snow.
Hima means snow.
And
Alaya above.
on the other side of this Himalaya, the flat plateau above is Trivishtam. So literally Tibet is the three-folded, it's on the three-folded land. And interestingly, when you look at trace all the stories about Ganga and all and how she flows, she actually flows from Trivishtam, Vishnu's foot in Trivishtam. And you can really trace all of that beautifully. So you find in our Puranic legends and the names they have used, the places, the names were very, very meaningful. It denotes the geographical feature or some function of that particular, the reason they had put it to use. And the legends also tie in very beautifully.
That's one thing. Let's come to the northeast of India. You have the state of Arunachal. Now the Chinese also claim Arunachal is theirs. They've been doing it for the last few years, and they said any Arunachali can go to China because he doesn't need a passport because he's already a Chinese, is what they say. But if you look at the term Arunachal itself, it deals with the northeast of India. What does the word Arunachal mean? Achal obviously is hill. Vindhyachal, Himachal, all Achal is hills. Okay. Now, these are northeastern hills, Achal. And what do you call it? Aruna? The sun rays fall in the land of Bharatavarsha. First in this place, Arunachal. Who is Aruna? Aruna is a charioteer of the sun. The chariot of sun has got 7 horses. And Aruna is a charioteer. So he comes first even before the sun divinity. So even before the sun rays fall on the land, first who comes? Aruna. That's why we call it Arunachal. See, so aptly named with the divinity or the concept of the ray of the sun falling first on this land. That's Arunachal. That's eastern portion of Bharatavarsha.
So for all the land on the east, you have this huge hills of the Arunachal, which forms your boundary. And the sun's rays, when it starts falling from there, then you know, okay, this is when the sun is entering your land. So Arunachal was the entry for India. That was our eastern boundary.
Very clearly so.
Was, no, is.
Yes. Was for Bharatavarsha, now is for
India.
Independent India. Now let's look at this. So this was very clearly said, right from all of Purana is there. Let's come down to it. What is the western point for India?
This is something that we have all forgotten and we don't really talk about.
It's there in our book.
So when the sun is rising over your land, the place where the sun sets over your land is your western boundary.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So what is the western end for this land which they have used in the Puranas? How have they defined that western land? They've called it Astachal. Asta means to set.
Astamanam.
So
setting sun.
Setting sun. Astachal. So
that's also Achal. That's also a hill. So Arunachal the east, Astachal the west.
And there, if you go and look at this Astachal, it is there is even today, there is a place called Astachal at the western end of Afghanistan.
And eastern end of Persia, which is now Iran.
There is a place called Astachal. It is even today, you can mark a place called Astachal.
They marked it in our book Brand Bharat. They shown both ends.
And in those days, Afghanistan was a part of India, right?
Bharatavarsha.
It was part of the Bharatavarsha. Land was Afghanistan on the west and Arunachal. Of course, Arunachal that time came under a larger portion, which was just called Kamarupa. So you had Kamarupa and Gandhara on either side flanking
two kingdoms, two
ends.
major kingdoms. So you have this. Similarly, naming. Pardon, you wanted to say something?
Gandhara is only part of what is Afghanistan today, isn't it? There is also a story that this place used to be called the land of Ashwagana, meaning like the land of horse trainers. Is that true that Afghanistan evolved from that word?
Ashwa, yes, it is one of the...
Avagana.
Avagana. Ashwa becomes Ava. Avagana is very much there. We mentioned about it in our article on Afghanistan. It's very much part of the land. And because those places were very famous for horses. And these were what? Not the Arabic horses. It was not the stallion. It was a local native horses. India had a variety of native horses. Again, which we have said in our book, Brand Bharat. You had a Kathiawadi horse. You had a Marwari horse. The Chetak, the famous Chetak is a Marwari horse. Native. And you had a horse in Manipur So the
There are
Manipuri
different
horses,
variety in Manipur.
totally different zoological variety from the stallion. So to say that stallion was used all over the world, no, we are very native. Do you know why stallion became famous and the Marwari and Kathiawadi did not become famous? The British officers, young officers, could not ride a Marwari or a Kathiawadi. It was too wild for them. So they couldn't control it. Whereas the Rajputs and the Jadejas of Kathiawad could control their horses very well. Because they lived with their horses. They didn't use the horses as just as a vehicle or
No, and also it all depends on how you dress up the horse. So the kind of dressings that they brought from England for their varieties of horses.
Weathers, what you call the weathers.
The place in the neck is called the wither and all that. So if those don't fit on these horses well, they are going to
irritate the horse.
It's going to.
So it used to just throw off the British officers. So they could never accept Indian horse. So they had to play it down as being inferior to the stallion. So that's a different story. When you say this, let's look at one other thing. The famous border between India and Pakistan. We all call it as Wagah border. See, Wagah is a village in the Pakistani side. On the Indian side, you got Atari village. We should call it Atari border. Just because Pakistanis call it Wagah border, we also should not be sporting the same thing. It's for us, it is an Atari border. Atari is the village on the Indian side. Because Wagah was also part of the undivided India, which someday hopefully will all become again one. That's a different matter. So the point is, what I'm getting back to is, going back to the Gosthana, it is very much a part of India. Galwan, the very naming says it was a place where from Ghulam Rasul Galwan and his predecessors to his successors, all of them were using these lands as the grazing lands. It's a very much part of the Ladakhi land for the Ladakhi cow. So all these intrusions should someday go out, and we should have clear access.
Peace for the cows.
Peace for the cows and peace for the people. So we should have our land back, and grass does grow, not just a blade of grass, but it's excellent grasslands. Now, going back to another point about Arunachal, we said one of the northeasternmost, of course, Arunachal itself is the northeast. One of the northeasternmost parts of Arunachal, there's a big lake there called Parshuram Kund, where in northeast, that's almost the first water body that you will see in the northeast. Arunachal Pradesh is a place called Parshuram Kund. It's quite inaccessible. But many people go there for trekking, and they go there for doing puja. As a proper yatra, they go there. So Parshuram is supposed to have done his tapasya there in Parshuram Kund, in northeastern part of Arunachal Pradesh. So very much part of Bharat. And in timeline, where do you place Parshurama? You place him before Rama, because he's a predecessor to Rama. Rama was there 7,100 years ago. So Parshurama is a predecessor to Rama. So he has done tapas there. Which is the land that you call Parshurama Kshetra in India, Bharatavarsha? The Malabar coast. From Mangaluru, Udupi, Mangaluru, all the way up to Yeah. So the stretch of Parshurama was in the northeast in Parshuram Kund in Arunachal Pradesh to southwest to the Malabar coast of Kerala. Look at the spread of Parshurama across the land in those times, 7,100 years back. So that shows us a spread of how this land is all united.
A geographically united entity
of a much larger framework. So for the Chinese to say Arunachal is part of their land, they can. This is 7,100 years back, before even the concept of China came up. The Han Kingdom or the Middle Kingdom or whatever you want to call it. Much millennia before that, we have a Parshuram Kund there. Parshurama having gone then tapas, we have the name called Arunachal, Arunachal Pradesh. We have Astachal. So everything. See, if you pause to look at the name, you will get so many answers to questions that you've asked and questions that you may want to ask also. So this land of Bharata throws up so many interesting things for us as we go along.
All right. Fascinating look at our history. And you've mentioned a lot of things that I don't think a lot of our viewers would have known. So thank you very much for that. I'm wondering if we should do kind of a quick session, rapid fire session, where I ask you names. If I ask you an old name, you have to give the new name. If I ask you a new name, you have to tell the old name. And let's see how it goes. See, I only know how to ask questions. I don't know how the answers.
The Nageshwari.
So let's start with an easy one. Peshawar.
Purushpur. Purushpur. Huh?
Multan.
Mulastan.
Multan, okay, Multan.
No, Mulastan. Actually, we written about it in our book, Breaking the Myths. Mulastan, there is a Ugrastamba there where probably Narasimha came there.
And here again, you
There's
see
a Surya temple there.
there's a beautiful thing of the spread. Okay, according to this history and the local validation and the local narrative, Narasimha's Mulastan, where he emanated, is so much in the northwest in Pakistan today. Whereas if you look where Narasimha is celebrated, it is much part of South
Deccan.
India, Deccan part,
Ahobilam.
which is today in Andhra as Ahobilam and parts of Karnataka. And the Vijayanagar kingdom itself was called the Narasimha kingdom. So here you celebrate. So just like you saw Parshuram, from west coast to northeast, here you have east coast to northwest.
Okay, so let's say actually we've written a full chapter in our book Breaking the Myths called Pakistan, a land of Hindu temples.
We have worldwide, I would say this is forced ignorance. There's a group of people that I can say don't want to really know their ancestry, don't want to know who their ancestors were, and they absolutely refuse to accept that their Purvaj were Hindus and that they were just like us Sanatanis. And in fact, I have read somewhere, I don't know if it is true or not, you guys are the experts here, you can clarify this for me. I have read that in India, up until 1905, even the Muslims, most of the Muslims in the country used to do Pitru Tarpana. It is when this party called Muslim League was formed, and then suddenly people were, started talking about associating themselves with Makkah and Medina and things like that, and then they slowly faded away. And I don't know if this is true or not, but perhaps you guys want to say something about it.
But very interestingly, Pitru Tarpan, an annual event, as an annual event itself, of course, we in India have a monthly as well as an annual period,
yes. Right.
which comes in the 7th month for us. Okay, around October, November, which is actually the 7th month, the Navratri, just before Navratri. In Indian calendar, it is only the 7th month because our calendar starts from the vernal equinox around March. Right. In Japan, they have a similar festival which is called Obon, and in a few places of very, very traditional Japan, it is still celebrated around the same period, whereas rest of Japan has retained that notion of the 7th month, and they are now celebrating in the 7th Gregorian calendar month. So for them now they're celebrating around July, but the 7th still lingers. Now look at the other interesting aspect. You find in America as well as Latin America, they celebrate the same. They have a festival for the ancestors and the dead. And in America, of course, you celebrate, and rest of the European world, they celebrated it as Halloween, right? And this is again around the 10th month period, end of 10th November, beginning of November, end of October. That period, which is which is the 7th month. If you look at the older calendar of the world, which used to start with the equinox, the world itself was having a common calendar which started with equinox across cultures. All the cultures, they were with the equinox until it changed over to the Gregorian. So the West has retained the 10th month as the 7th month and celebrating it then. We are celebrating it as 7th month in October as well. Japan is, in the East, they have retained the 7th and gone into the Gregorian. But everybody is universe. I mean, in the world, all over globally, we are all celebrating a festival for our ancestors around the same time.
Look at go to Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world. Still, they celebrate it also because they still got Hindu names. course, they don't call it Hindu names, they call it names from Mahabharata, Ramayana, Purana, all those things, because that is their culture, their kalachar. So they also celebrate this. So it's been across the land.
So,
And there is a very interesting reason, okay, for this, but that's too much to get into right now.
We can do a
But
different
why
session.
during this period is very, very explainable.
We explain that why the 7th month, why Pitru Tarpan this month in our book called Deepavali.
And also in our book, Indo-Japan, we have given a little bit of the reason.
Wow. I'd like to go on, but I think we are running a little short on time. But as always, it's a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you very much. Namaskaram, and all the best for all your new endeavors. I know you are really busy doing a lot of things these days. And I mean, I don't know. I think I'm a prolific author. I should look at you and then tuck my tails and then go away. So amazing stuff that you keep putting out. Thank you very much, Hema and DK Hari. And we'll hope to see you soon. Namaskaram.
Thank you. Namaste.